Zach, if you want to start.
Yeah, actually, and we can start with a question from Duke, and I'll let him ask that if he's here to ask. Okay, he's muted. Oh, are you able to ask Duke? I guess not. He's not responding. So his question is, what are your opinions on Ernst Jünger and the conservative revolution in general?
Who, me?
No,
No,
we are already asking
the
Curt Doolittle.
AMA.
Okay.
River, please be quiet.
Yeah. So once more, the Ernst Jünger and the conservative revolution is, I guess, generally your thoughts.
Well, so not specific to Younger, but understand what I do is I read science and I read history. I don't read much philosophy, and I really don't read much opinion. I use the framework of philosophy largely so that I can discredit it. So in that sort of framework, I tend not to read these people anyway because I'm not really looking for literary inspiration. I'm trying to solve a fairly technical problem of what is the secret to the West and how do I institutionalize that if it's not only uncommon that we understand what that secret is, and we have institutionalized it poorly enough that we are vulnerable to the kind of attacks that we've been vulnerable to during the 19th and 20th century. So that's my technical understanding. My other understanding, my more normative understanding would be that I know that all of us, when we are searching for identity and to achieve, to change the status quo and to search for power, that we look generally to the past. And my argument would be that while that period that Jünger is taking place in, that his work is it took place in a certain time and place, that I would view it as applicable only to that time and place, largely because what worked at that very unique point in time can never work again. So people don't exist, the circumstances don't exist, the incentives don't exist. And so I don't see that as particularly useful to me. The third piece of the puzzle is that I tend to have a fairly high opinion of German culture, but a fairly low opinion of German literature. And this is, I'm not sure I'm right about having that opinion. The first reason is that German reaction to the Enlightenment was to accept the need for reason and to eliminate superstition from speech, but to merely eliminate it from speech and to continue to preserve this extremely emotional, experiential form of literary philosophy and thinking, and I view that as both fascinating, given the success of Germany in retaining its culture, but frustrating in the sense that Germans have produced a lot of words and not really done much with them in philosophy. As a matter of fact, you can see the failure of the New Right in Germany and in France, for that matter. Their failure as a failure to be able to circumvent this problem. They're just really trying to. They're just want Christianity back so badly that they're willing to do almost anything to get it, and that era is gone.
Real fast, we kind of started on the wrong foot. We should have, because a lot of people are new to propertarianism or even haven't heard the term. Could you briefly, to the people who are listening who would be new, give a summary or?
Well, the best way to think about it is we had, in the ancient world, we had this change that came along with Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, right? Or Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and perhaps Zeno, which was the thing we think of as Stoicism, but that combination, when combined with Roman culture, gave us the Roman Empire. We also had another innovation by Bacon, Francis Bacon, by John Locke, Adam Smith, and David Hume, that gave us the we think of as the Anglo Enlightenment. And then we had this second half of that Enlightenment in Darwin, Menger in economics, Nietzsche in aesthetics and philosophy, Maxwell in science, Poincaré in mathematics, Spengler in social philosophy. Spengler, God, I do that all the time. Spencer, social philosophy, and we had the three social scientists. I'll speed up a little bit. I took a nap, so I tried to get my juice back.
Yeah, we gotta get that high energy.
So the three social scientists, Durkheim, Weber, and Pareto, we had those people all come to us, and unfortunately the war interrupted that movement. The war, the attempt, the malicious attempt for Britain, France, and Russia to contain Germany. We had the war, and afterwards the war created so many changes that, including the movement of people from the farm to industry, that the Jewish Marxist Bolshevik movement posed such a significant threat to us that we sort of spiraled for a while. And philosophy I know this is a long answer to the question, but it's the only way to answer the question. And our philosophers all screwed up. We had our philosophers got stuck in the philosophy of language, Wittgenstein and Russell. We had Mises discover operationalism in economics and try to make it into a pseudoscience. We had Brewer unsuccessfully in mathematics try to bring about mathematical intuitionism. We had Brigman in physics try to bring about operations in science, and was somewhat successful in it. But together they never formed a cohesive rebellion against what had emerged in the left as the Jewish pseudosciences of Marxism, Marxist economics and social theory, Boasian anthropology, pseudoscientific anthropology, Freudian pseudoscience of psychology, even silly stuff like Cantor's restatement of mathematics as mathematical Platonism, or pseudoscientific mathematics. And so we had all these things happen, and our people just failed. In fact, the only one that actually succeeded at all was Friedrich Hayek, which is one of the reasons he's so highly regarded. And so if you want to look at my work, I would put my work in context. We had the first major revolution in the ancient world, pre-ancient world, which was when we invented Arianism, or militaristic, heroic, sky worshipping, technological expansionist, civilization. Then we had the Greek Revolution, particularly accumulating in Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, and then and Zeno and the Roman imperialism. We had the Enlightenment culminating in our success in world colonialism. We had the suicide of the West with the attempt to contain Germany, and this interrupted our completion of that era of the Nietzschean Darwinian program. And so what I've tried to do is, and I think I've succeeded at, is complete that program. And that is, I've restated Western civilization's ancient group evolutionary strategy in scientific terms. Now, it's not as fun as reading a fantasy story or reading heroic inspirational stuff. It's actually quite technical, but it provides us with what we've missed, is that we've had these pseudosciences come out from the left. They do reality by chanting. They openly lie to us with postmodernism. And we have had no answer. We've had no intellectual response. And in fact, our intellectual response has been a complete failure. So what I've tried to do is reground conservatism instead of moral language into scientific language. There you go.
I'll let Barmbek jump in there. I unmuted him. He's got quite a long...
Hear me now?
It's a little low, but go ahead, yeah. Just say it with your chest.
Okay, so just for some background for other people, you talk a lot about the psychological differences between conservative and leftist people.
Yes.
Like as a moral division of labor where you have the short-term focus and long-term focus.
Oh, you mean you actually read something I write?
Yeah, from time to time. So in your framework, you have the libertarian as sort of in the middle where they facilitate exchange between the other specializations. And
Yes.
I was wondering, I actually heard about this first through RK selection theory, and I was wondering if you heard about that. And I just thought it was weird in RK selection theory, there's no real explanation for this libertarian psychology. So do you want to go on from there?
Well, Garrett, there's... I have this, I love to give thorough answers, right? I just gotta try to remember I'm talking to guys who are my, or we think alike. The answer to most questions in science is to not look for anything complicated. It's that if you have an answer and you're wrong, it's even simpler. Realistically, we all start out with the option of being both genders, right? And then the X or Y chromosome that we get from our fathers takes us one way or the other. And so to get a male, you do certain things, and get a female to do certain things. And women are a lot less different than men are different. Does that make sense? Yes, no.
Yeah, women are sort of more average.
They're more average, and men vary wider. We have more of us that are worse and more of us that are better, and women tend to be grouped around the middle. Sucks for women because that means a lot of them have to settle. Used to be good for us until the fatpocalypse came around. And so, how did you ask that question? You asked it as the libertarian thing. Well, so you have the libertarianism generally start out as the ascendant male. Like if it's a teenage thing. You're the ascendant male, and if you're the ascendant males and you're pretty physically dominant, you just will rely on that. And if you're an ascendant male and that's not as available to you, you will find the next best thing, and that's what libertarianism is. But we also find that it's just simply genetic, in that that there's more emotion in the conservative side. There's a little less emotion in the libertarian. mentality. And we would say that libertarians are extremely concerned with access to information and experience, and less interested in hierarchy and purity. In other words, the joke that what's his name? The joke that Jonathan Haidt says is that it's almost impossible to make a libertarian feel disgust, and it's pretty easy for make a conservative feel disgust. So you get a very definite personality type that appears to be, I always think of us as more evolved, but as excessively male. In other words, the process of making a libertarian, it seems to me, of producing an excessively male change in the brain structure.
So the reason why we don't really see it in the animal kingdom is they don't have advanced things like societies like we have, and that's sort of where it can come.
Well, we do see it. We do see it. I mean, what do you think happens to a lion when he goes off on his own? Joins with other males. You see it. You see it all the time in the animal kingdom. I think the problem you don't see in the animal kingdom as easily is because they don't have what do you call it? They don't have consciousness to rely on. They can't express the desire for novelty change as anything other than sexual pursuit or expansion of hunting ground, right? That's how they generally express it. Although you see it you see it really interesting in crows. I mean, they love to torture the shit out of each other. I mean, they just find a squirrel and tease it all day for amusement. I mean, so you do see it in other smart animals, but it's just rare to see it. And even if we did, we may not recognize it for what it is, because in ourselves, we tend to romanticize it as more than what it is, which is that inability to obtain stimuli through more emotional means, and need to attain stimuli through more experience, through freedom to obtain new experiences on our own.
So do you think this these sort of roles of like liberal, conservative, libertarian are more, I suppose they're conflated, but more individuated experiences, or more of filling larger societal roles?
Well, that would be that the way you ask that question is one of those. I don't want to. I don't want to come across as saying, well, his universe has made a role for us. I would say that instead, that between the extremely feminine, which gives you psychosis, and the extremely masculine, which gives you autism, all of us exist on a combination of masculine and feminine traits, and that in human beings, because we're able to cooperate through communication, voluntary cooperation, that turns out to be extremely useful, because it means that without having to create warrior ants and queen ants, we actually can just adapt and do the same thing through communication that other organisms have to do through biological transformation. We can do just through different degrees of maturity and voluntary cooperation and training. So
the main difference between humans and animals is the sort of general purpose nature of the individual.
Yeah, we're able. We are different from one another, but basically we can work as a extremely. I mean, it matters more. We've probably passed peak human, in the late Neolithic. At this point, what we have evolved, we're evolving mostly through changing our knowledge. In other words, our software, our programming, what we learn. And we've been doing that for a long time now, ever since we got speech. So other animals can't do that. And so this fact that we differ from each other genetically quite a bit allows us to divide up all these different interests, but use cooperation like basically a very large networked set of computers, so to speak, if you want to think about it in normal terms, in current technological terms. So it's pretty cool adaptive mechanism. It's just very expensive. I mean, this was the argument that Dawkins and what's his name? The other guy that was wrong. Anyway, that the blind watchmaker. What's his name? Anyway, Dawkins used to have this argument with was that intelligence is an extremely expensive trait, and it's not clear that it's actually all that advantageous. So will it eventually develop or not? My attitude is, of course, it will develop. It will develop, but I mean, because it just fills a niche. It's just we inherited a really fascinating way of as an organism of working in vast numbers. I mean, think about it. What do we use money and prices for? It's an information protocol, right? I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, what other animal can do that? Can cooperate on that kind of scale?
Yeah, the internet's really a super organism that is a living thing almost.
Well, it actually has increased the rate at which we can communicate, cooperate, and synthesize knowledge. I mean, I was born before this was here, and I started working on these kinds of things back before it was here. And I can't believe that how much easier it is to do research today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, in the era of books, do you know how long it took to learn something? Just Wikipedia alone, I mean, you can pull up Wikipedia, figure out, okay, this in general, these guys were trying to do this, I see what that, yeah, whatever. And you can search and find it. Or, to do anything like that used to take you weeks. Even, the kind of stuff we would try to find today in 30 seconds would take you weeks or months to figure out. So, I mean, that's phenomenal, but I want to get back to our genetics and our knowledge. We have genes. We vary quite a bit our perceptions are all customized to our reproductive strategies. So, and then we cooperate, and we use this cooperation not only to work together for a benefit, but as an information system. Then we've added language on top of that information system. Then we've added numbers and writing and the narrative and formulas and philosophy and all these other things upon. Then we added money and prices on top of that. And now we've got accounting and the internet on top of it. And we've got computers. I mean, the amount of computation we're doing that a genetically bound organism has to do by trial and error and generation by generation mutation is insane, right? I mean, look at what we can do with it. So that's what's really cool about us. But of course, that's why we don't see it in nature, as nothing else can do anything near that.
If I could jump to another set of questions. This is from, I'll let Jared if he has a mic. Jared, do you have a mic?
No, Jared doesn't have a microphone.
Okay.
But his question is, how does one reject a priorism without violating the law of non-contradiction?
It's a language game. There's only one epistemological method, right? There's you look at some stuff, you do free association, which is our brains work as a bunch of highly parallelized sort of search engines. We do observation or perception, free association, hypothesis. In other words, we find something, we falsify that as hypothesis. In other words, in our minds, the way we work out is say, is that possible? Could that be real? And then we go to theory, which means, okay, this might be possible. Let me go really work at seeing if this is true or not. That's a theory. And once it survives all the tests, both that you can falsify them and the market falsifies them, then we have what we consider a law. So you have observation, free association, hypothesis, theory, and law. Now we can the difference between let's just apply this to what a fact is, for example, a fact versus a theory. So we use the same process applies to theory. Now what is a fact? Well, a fact is a theory about an observation rather than a theory about a cause and effect relationship. And so this is no matter what we talk about, I can reduce it to that. Well, what is a priori? You remember what Kant was trying to do before you get to the a priori. He was trying to invent a way to conflate things together. It's probably too advanced a topic for this. Let's just stay with observation, hypothesis, theory, law, and that if we were to look at a priorism, it consists of this is gonna. I don't know if you guys. I'm gonna try this. All right. There's 3 dimensions to a priorism. A priori means can I achieve this through logic or through reason without seeing it first. And so basically this is another way of saying is what can the human mind produce that it can depend on? And so when you look at a priorism, it has 3 dimensions. It has a prioricity. It has, excuse me, I'm going to go find my own work on this so I don't have to go look it up. But there's 3 dimensions to it. And if you look at whether they're necessary or contingent, a prioristic or not, the third one's escaping me, you basically come up with, we can restate that as, is it categorically consistent? Excuse me, go back. Is we look at a priorism and all the contingent factors on it, it turns out that almost everything is contingent. In other words, very little we can say is contingent is not contingent, and those things that we can say that are not contingent are special cases. They're sort of like prime numbers. So there's not a lot of things that we are really a priori in the sense that we can use them for the purpose of deduction. They're just another way of looking at the world, of saying, well, there's deduction, which there's identity, deduction, induction, and abduction. Well, there's the a priori, then a priori, and necessary, the a priori and contingent. And you say, well, that's just another way of saying something really, really similar to saying a hypothesis, a theory, and a law. So we have all these ways of saying, confusing ourselves by saying, well, by giving different names to things. So I'm going to take the a priorism, say necessary and contingent, and the different layers of it, and the same thing as saying deductive, inductive, abductive, and guessing, or the same thing as law, theory, hypothesis, free association, and maybe dreaming. And I'm going to say, well, those are all the same basic process. Now, but what we can get to is say, well, why is the world like it is? I mean, why are we able to conduct this reasoning? What was Kant trying to get at? And that's that, you've probably understood, you've probably studied enough mathematics to think of in terms of a point, which is a single thing, a line, 2, a shape, 3, an object, 4, the 3-dimensional object, and time, which is change in state, or the number, addition to subtraction, set manipulation, which is multiplication, division, the geometry, and the calculus. And you can see that this is all saying the same thing. This is from simple to complex, from more and more parts. Well, and the universe works like mathematics. It's a one point, there's a point, a line, a say, whatever. And how does that work in logic? Well, that works in other words, in spoken words, just like I've gone through all these different philosophical and scientific and mathematical and physical world relations. The linguistic equivalent of this is to say categorical, like is it categorically consistent? Because that's the only thing the mind can do, is determine similarity and difference. The brain is a difference engine. So that's what we can actually do. That's what he says a priori. Well, that's what it means, is our brains can apprehend the things that are logical, which means they can determine similarities and differences. That's all our brain can do. So that's that's point. The next step is logic. Is it internally consistent? In other words, is it not self-contradictory, and is also at least meaningful? The third point would be, is it externally correspondent, empirical? The fourth point would be, is it existentially demonstrable? In other words, can we do it through operations? The fifth point would be, is it rational? In other words, can we choose it? In other words, just like the rest of the nature can't choose, but as humans we can choose. As reciprocal, meaning is it moral? Can both parties choose? And lastly, is it fully accounted for? In other words, have we made a theory and known the limits of it? And lastly, can we narrate it? In other words, can I put a narration on it? So just in every single method of thought humans can come up with, the same process continues, and we can do the same with linguistic speech as we can do with mathematics, as we can do with the spatial universe, as we can do with the mathematical use, etc. So the a priorism is sort of a primitive, unscientific way of trying to bound reality with rationalism. In other words, state that the logic is superior to the full. In other words, a subset of reality we call logic is superior to the full set of reality, and this is false. This is something we know it's false because we know that any dimension of reality, like logic, isn't closed. You have to go, if you want to make sure categories are correct, you have to use logic. If you have logic is correct, you have to use empiricism. If you want empiricism that's correct, you have to use operationalism. If you want to know operationalism is correct, you have to use full accounting. If you want to use you want to bring it into the human realm, you have to use that it's a rational choice. And if you want to bring it into the moral, social world, you have to say, is it reciprocal? And so I view Kant, what I've tried to do is basically eliminate Kant's attempt here to say man is bound by these artificial things and say, well, it's all just science, and Kant was just trying to invent a pseudoscience, just like the Marxists were trying to invent a pseudoscience. Because everybody was afraid of empiricism. Everybody was terrified of it. The English come up with this thing out of law. The French, the Germans, the Jews, the Russians, now you're seeing the Muslims, everybody's terrified of this damn thing called truth. We're not terrified of it because we grew up with it. That's what makes the West unique. We invented deflationary truth. Now, I just probably overwhelmed everybody.
I think a little bit, but they can re-listen in the future. I think Random has an expansion on that, or
Yeah, I was going to ask about limits. Corresponds with a prioris. Would you say that a priori basically makes up for a limit, but then you're not really able to justify if it's good, preferable, or truthful? Well, priorities really aren't truthful. It has to be either preferable or good, would it not?
That's a really great question. I hadn't thought about it that way. I tend to just abandon the whole German program, and I just go with, there's a difference between being categorical, logical, empirical, operational, rational, and moral. And that and then the problem you have to get is it even if it's moral, is it good? In other words, is it good? Well, something is either impossible or is either imaginable or not, possible or not, preferable or not, good or not, or true or not. And you have those two dimensions working with each other, the good dimension and the true dimension, and one is useful and one is just whether it's decidable or not. And that's just a lot to ask of ordinary humans. I mean, it's once you understand it, it's actually pretty trivial, and all this linguistic problem we confuse ourselves with. I mean, we think of ourselves as so enlightened compared to people who talked in, let's say, theological verse or supernatural prose and make nonsense stuff about ghosts and demons. But we're actually pretty much in a, because of the 20th century, we're in a linguistic pseudoscientific box right now that is going to take a couple generations to get out of. That's what Hayek said, right? Hayek said that the 20th century remembered in history as the age he called it mysticism, return to mysticism. more correctly, it's pseudoscience.
Twitch.
Yeah. So essentially, my follow-up is as follows. Let me pull this up again to state it exactly. If, as you say, there is only one epistemological method, could you explain the process of that method operating on that proposition itself for us?
Well, trying to think of which way should I answer that. I want to undermine the attempt to continue to use these kind of verbalisms and simply say, well, can we state that it's true? Because the fact that something has to be self-explanatory is one of the errors of rationalism. It comes out of the search for justification in biblical prose. So I would say it's a silly question because only someone who believed in superstitious reasoning would ask me that. But you're asking it because you want to say you want to get to what's true. Now, if I were to say to you, it's impossible to prove anything's true. It's only possible. In other words, you can prove, and you can try to prove that the Bible says something or the Talmud says something. You can try to prove that a mathematical equation is deducible. You can try to you can try to state that a set of logical statements are internally consistent. You could call that true, but it isn't. It just means internally consistent. You go back to that mathematical statement and say, well, mathematicians don't claim that they state truths. They only state proofs. In other words, I can prove that this is internally consistent. The only person who can speak truth is an individual. A thing can't be true. I can only speak truthfully about it. Internally, it can only be internally or externally consistent, whatever. So, my way of answering that question is that it's actually a Victorian parlor game that puts a standard that we know is false, and that is that no system of logic on its own is closed. And that's what incompleteness means. No system of logic is closed. So I can't make a categorical claim, a claim about identity, without appealing to logic, and I can't make a claim about logic without appealing to correspondence. I can't make a claim about correspondence being true unless I make a claim to operational possibility. I can't make a claim about operational, I can't make a claim that operational is true unless I've gone to demonstrate that it's also fully accounted for. So, in other words, I falsified it and know its limits. So it's not. So the statement itself is, can you internally test something? Well, I can internally test a word game, but it doesn't tell me anything about the truth. The truth is, can I falsify? Does this survive falsification in all dimensions? So if you're going to ask me, is it possible to falsify what I'm saying? And it is possible if there's an additional dimension to reality. In other words, there's an additional unknown dimension to reality that we're tested in beyond full accounting. I don't think it's possible for us to imagine it or to speak it or to act it. So I doubt that it's possible, but it is falsifiable.
Hey, so then, to follow that up, what would, I guess, when we talk about falsifiability, to say something is falsifiable, we don't have to give the exact character, of course, to the exact thing that would refute it, because, I mean, in saying it's falsifiable, we're saying we don't yet know, but maybe. But we should be able to say something about the kind of thing that would falsify it. So,
well,
in this
I want to give you the canon example, which is Einstein, right? The canon example is, what is length? What does length mean? Well, the reason, length doesn't mean what we thought it meant before Einstein. Neither does time. So the problem is we don't know the limits My argument is that it's true if it's true within the limits you're claiming. So if you're, so we still use Newtonian physics all the time. I mean, we run the world by Newtonian physics. It's the stuff that's bigger than human scale, right? Space and or smaller than human scale, where we don't rely on Newtonian physics. But in real life, we rely on Newtonian physics all the time. So Newtonian physics consists of any scientific statement consists of two basic halves of the coin. One is the recipe formula, and one is the narrative. So one of the process you use to solve problems, and the narrative you give about it, or the excuse. We use the process to act, and we use the narrative to search for opportunities to act. That's what we do. So when I look at Newton, I don't say Newton was. I say that his theory was false, but his recipe was right. He just didn't know the limits. I'm going to say the same thing for Einstein, although Einstein, he knew there was something wrong. There's something that's not right with the standard model. We don't know what it is yet, but there's something not right, and it is because we just can't imagine how the universe could work the way that we just can't imagine it in the same way that nobody could imagine space-time was what it was. So so when we say something's falsifiable, well, things can be falsifiable, but my experience with the empirical evidence is we're actually really good at observing reality and making recipes about it. Our stories get better and better and better over time, and they get better and better over time because the precision, in other words, the limit we're able to conceive within, improves. So my view about my work is that somebody's going to come around someday and come up with something the way that someone came up with the two guys come up with calculus, and then we have a couple of guys come up with Lie groups now. In other words, intermediary phenomenon. It turns out that we get economics as we understand equilibrium out of calculus. That's where it comes from. But then it turns out that you can't actually solve economic problems with calculus. You have to get to Lie groups to solve it, and we're just beginning to understand them. And a Lie group is basically an intermediary phenomenon, a sort of symmetry that occurs when things with huge variation produce a resulting pattern. So I'm sure that everything can be falsifiable. The question is, can we convert ourselves over from this sort of medieval thinking that we see came out of like the Kantian counter-revolution against empiricism? Can we get over that, and can we move into converting all our language to scientific prose rather than this sort of attempt to preserve biblical interpretation in words?
So then, for the sum up point for me, you said that, and correct me on this because I want to have your phrasing right, that a statement is true or something is true, sort of if it's true within the limits that you intended it to be.
I love you. Will you marry me?
So then,
no, it's very hard. If you can get someone to that point where they say that on their own, they're done. You don't have to do anything. It's actually very hard to get your mind into that place and apply it. But once you understand that, it's really so much. Yeah, I understand what you're saying to me, but you always ask me, but what's the limit? At what point does it fail?
Yeah, what is the limit for the claim itself that there is one epistemological method?
Yeah. Well, what's the limit for it?
Yeah. Such that it can have a truth, because it seems that one thing you do seem to be saying is that there are no limitless claims. What would that even mean?
There are no limitless claims, Chris. My view, and this is why I leave open, I say, well, what bothers me is the reason I'm saying I know how to test what we're able to talk about, right?
In other words, see the ideal language project in essence is completed. That philosophy is done, and what's left is science.
Well, no. Philosophy being choice and truth being science. I think those are two different things. That's like the difference between good and true. I think the job of philosophy, I think decidability is done, and the language problem is done. I think that deciding what is good and preferable, that is philosophy. Does that make sense to you?
It does. One final question, and this isn't really in that direction, but just will inform me. Have you perchance read Wittgenstein's Tractatus?
Yes.
General opinion on it?
He was a very bright guy, and my view is that there is a group of people on this planet who have a particular heritage that
Yeah,
have,
you're in a space where that's known, or at least
What?
considered by
What?
most people here.
Say again?
You're in a place where what you're meaning is quite plainly known to most people.
Right. And so just like women live in a world of emotion, men live in a world of action, there's some people that live in a world of word. And that group of people has been able to evolve the ability to live in a world of words by reversing sexual dimorphism. In other words, transferring of female traits to the male and transferring traditionally male traits to the female. And this is where their particular talent comes from. And I just, unfortunately, I can't afford to pay for the research to prove that, but I'm dead positive on it from the data I've seen. I would say that just as women have assertive, we have to look at women as having a bit of a disability in what we call reason. I'm going to say it's a disability from our perspective as people, as men who have to worry about the tribe, whereas it's an ability for them as women who have to worry about offspring. I think certain people have a problem with language because the reason they have self-selected for the use of language so long is to maintain group cohesion at the expense of truth. So I don't really, when I read Wittgenstein, I see another Ashkenazi just trying to keep the Bible, the Talmud. The Talmud's been the structure of discussing the Talmud through the use of pilpul has really just been selected for out of the population, and that's what I see. The general idea that the mind consists of a bunch of images. He was basically doing what we all do, just like somebody today will use computer analogy. He was writing in the era of the development of early movies. And he was using that new technology to express what he thought was. And so I see that there. So these people are wrapped in language. Unfortunately for our people, our high trust people that we are, we don't do that, and we are wired to be trusting, and so it's possible for us to use overloading. So, for example, I went through some very, very heavy material with you by comparing the dimensions of existential reality with the dimensions of thought, of mathematics, of language. That is a very hard thing to understand, and so that's overloading. I could be a woman and come to you. If a woman touches you, she instinctually knows that her pheromones and her touch will alter a man's thinking ability. And she will try to get close to you and alter your thinking that way. In other words, overloading. Some other people try to use guilt, rallying and shaming to overload you. Some people use propaganda and moralizing, and some people will use complexity to overload you. And so we have a limited reason, and when our ability to reason is overloaded, we fall back in intuition, and our intuition is suggestible, and so and that's the problem, is we're very, very suggestible. Now, a low trust people is less suggestible, but a high trust people is very suggestible. So that's our vulnerability as Europeans, is that we've developed the only high trust population, the only high trust society, but we're also extremely vulnerable because we're way too trusting. And we're not just of actions, which is what we do, but we're trusting of the various kinds of overloading. And the truth is, our reason at present hasn't been capable of doing that, to providing us with a means of defending against it. So what I want to do is I want to revert the industrialization of lying that was made possible by the invention of inexpensive and mass media and centralized authority, frankly, to accomplish in the modern world what was achieved with the book in the late medieval world, and writing in the pulpit in the late antiquity. And so and what was achieved to attack us. I mean, you got to remember, religion, as we think about it, organized religion, was invented to retaliate against Western European, against Europeans, Aryans. It was invented as a means of retaliating against. So we're very vulnerable. We fall for this vulnerability all the time. And what I want to do is make it very difficult. In other words, I don't blame other peoples for attacking us. I blame ourselves for not solving the problem of preventing lying. And so what I want to do is I want to put it into the law that if you're making a political claim, that you have to warranty it just like we warranty goods and services, claims about goods and services. And so if you're going to make a political claim, I want to make sure that it happens, that goes out there. In other words, I want to be able to prosecute liars about politics. That's the only way I can think of to defend us. To that, we have to go kill a lot of people.
Zach, you there?
Yeah, but Zoltanus had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was wanting to know, is there a good way, from your opinion, to reject Hegelian dialectics, dialectical materialism, both very influential to modernism, idealism, and postmodernism?
Well, see, this is the beauty of it. This is the beauty of their method, is that as long as you believe you can prove something, you can't. And instead, there's if somebody tries to prove something, they're lying. Until you get to falsification and say, show me how this can't be false. Until you get to that point, and that you understand that what that means, in other words, that the world still argues pre-Darwinian, and that science and as a science as we practice it is a post-Darwinian achievement, and that the question isn't whether you can advocate something, but whether you can survive prosecution. I think it's until we are willing to prosecute these people, which is what I think I'm doing. I think I'm inventing the new Inquisition. Unless you can prosecute these people, I think that you're not taking responsibility on yourself to silence them, and instead hoping someone will silence them for you. I hope that answered your question. It might not have answered your question.
I was just wanting to know how to reject both of them, because a lot of people argue from dialectical viewpoints.
Right. You say, how do I know you're not lying?
Okay.
You change the discussion from how is that true to how do I know and how do you know? Because because the elephant of our intuition and our genes, as we've seen in populations that vote, right? We see people vote their group evolutionary strategy. That's what they do. And so, we've seen people justify every political position on it. We see people aren't persuadable to change it. Really, their moral intuition won't change. The means of achieving what they believe are mutually acceptable ends will change, but their moral intuition won't change. So the question is not whether we know that we can't be sure that we're not either lying ourselves or a proxy for the lies of others on behalf, and our genes are just influencing us in order to be proxy for liars for others or lie to ourselves. The question is, how do you know you're not lying? I know you're not. And then to walk them through it. And so it's really simple. I mean, if you get to say, can you state that operationally? Now I've been teaching this to people for a couple of years now, and it blows your mind after you work with it a little while, because you start saying, well, let me expand your sentence. What does that turn into? And then you just keep doing it. And even the process of just very trivial attempts to falsify others, to say, well, it's not that you can prove you're right, because you can make excuses for anything. I mean, that's what numerology does, right? Numerology is a way of making excuses. Well, what does biblical interpretation do? Well, it's a way of making excuses. Well, what's Pilpul originated? In other words, the ability to interpret Jewish law is a way to make excuses. And so you can make excuses out of anything, and you can overload the human mind. The question is, can you falsify it? Well, in other words, can I reduce things to things that can't be overloaded? In other words, can I break a sentence? Or can I fully expand a set of sentences so that each part is individually testable and I cannot be overloaded? In other words, I can't be fooled. Well, I mean, it turns out it's pretty easy to do it. And if you do it, then you deflate them. But I would say, well, how do I know you're not lying? And that's how I take it. I said, don't... we need to get away from the Christianity and the Greek method of presuming the innocence of the other party. You churn it around. You say, we're going to be prosecutors. The question about truth is not whether you can justify it, but whether it survives prosecution. The reason a scientific statement is true is because it survives attempts at falsification. So the question, the way we attack the left is, well, it seems like you're lying, and it seems like you're stealing. So let's go through your argument and see how you're not lying or not stealing. And it takes you a little while to get at it. But I mean, I've been turning out people now for a couple of years, and they're getting awful good at it.
So I noticed that on your Twitter, you have the NRX hashtag in your bio. My question is, what is your opinion on specifically Curtis Yarvin's unqualified reservations? Because he's pretty influential in the movement.
Sure. Well, of course. How many have you guys read The Culture of Critique?
Yeah, we actually had Professor McDonald on a bit ago.
So, critique is a way of gossip. It's an advanced form of ridicule, right? And so, what do women do when they annoy a bunch of guys and make them feel bad, right? That's what it is. Well, Yarvin is correct in identifying the problem. In other words, the change from the military-industrial complex to the state academy media complex. In other words, a replacement of the martial and legal hierarchy with the new priestly hierarchy. And he's right about that. What I tend to tell people is that we all carry with us brain structures, cultural structures, and educational structures. We can carry gender biases with us. We carry cognitive biases with us. We carry all sorts of things. We carry conservative, libertarian, liberal biases with us, etc. So we have all these things with us. And so when I look at Hoppe, what do you see when you look at Hoppe? You see German rationalism, Kantian German rationalism. The fact that Hoppe deduced everything correctly from the point of private property is one thing, but everything else he comes up with is just excuse making. It's a bunch of nonsense. If we go to, and this is the guy that I feel I learned everything from. If you go to Curtis Yarvin, what do you see? Well, you see critique. And so what he has done is he made a very wordy gossip. It's fun to listen to. It's fun to go into. But did he come up with an action that's solvable? No. What action did he come up with? He came up with another statement of what we call libertarianism, which is actually Jewish separatism. So no, I mean, I think it's each of us brings a piece of the pie to the puzzle. You know, Murray Rothbard brought separatism to it. Why did Mises screw up when he discovered operationalism in economics? Well, he did it because he's trying to make law and logic out of a scientific thing, and he didn't understand the difference between falsifiable science, empiricism, and justificationary hermeneutic interpretation of mathematics. So we all bring these things to the table. So I consider myself a reactionary, in other words, a counter-revolutionary against the norm. I see Yarvin bringing his critique to it, which is that he brought a very literary continental critique to it. I see Hoppe bringing a very rational to it. I'm bringing a legal critique to it. I mean, if you reduce what I'm talking about to the origins of the kinds of thoughts I use, it's, you know, Anglo-empiricism, it's law. I mean, the origin of empiricism is out of law, both in the ancient world under Aristotle and in the modern world under Bacon and those people. Science is one thing, but that's measurement or testing. But the kind of thinking we think of as falsification is actually out of prosecution of cases.
If I could jump in, I just saw your Facebook post about Trump acts as a Christian monarch, but I also saw that you are writing a book currently in that post.
Yes.
Yes. One of our staff members was wondering if you or when you were writing a book. So what is the status of your book, and maybe a little bit about that?
If we were on a video, I'd show it to you. I post, there's some pages posted up there.
Okay.
You know, I've drafted the book 3 times before, and each time I got stuck. In other words, I got to some point I couldn't solve. Well, I finally in June, I finished solving the hard problem, which is religion. Honestly, truth took me less than a year. Religion took me almost 3 years. It was hard. Religion's a hard thing to understand. You know, I mean, in the sense that religion, the services, the necessary services that religion provides are necessary. In other words, they really are necessary. But how do you provide them truthfully? That was the problem I was trying to solve. So I got there the first week of June. And so at this point, it's possible for me to finish the book. So I've got it. What now I'm doing is I'm going through, and Alberto Zambrano, who's a professor in I can't remember, Venezuela, I believe. He selected a range of my work to try to condense and edit down, and I've taken that, and now I'm going through and I'm adding what I see as the missing content to it. Right now, it's going to be a tome, guys. It's going to be, you know, it's like Man, Economy, and State, or, you know, it's of that size. It's a really big book, but it has so much in it. I mean, I'm really restructuring. I'm uniting science and philosophy, and I'm walking through so many different concepts, and I'm trying to do it in a form that isn't this long-winded stuff, but you could read, you know, you can read a little piece of it and contemplate that, or read a piece and contemplate it, or you can just read this one chapter and sort of get the overview. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there, so it's a big work. I'm going to try to get it out. You know, I'm working really 12 hours a day on it, so I'm going to try to get it out as fast as I can. We'll see.
Okay, and
I think it'll be really
real quick before we. Okay, Zach, you want to go over what you were going to say? Because
I don't have to go anywhere. So.
Yeah. I just wanted. I wanted to get on that same post where you're talking about Trump as a Christian monarch, and maybe give. You were going to talk about a post how you would illustrate the difference in superiority of monarchies. Could you delve into that? Because I know there's quite a few monarchs in here.
Well, I mean, I think that you start with Hobbes' insight that the intergenerational incentives of a monarch are superior to the temporal incentives of a renter. And in simple terms, I think that's true. That's about all there is to say. Um, in the sense of the Western tradition, um, uh, a headman or a king or a chieftain, we elected these guys. We only went over to hereditary monarchy because the truth is there isn't much. If your organization is big enough, your royal family is big enough, and your nobility is big enough, and you can put together enough of a market, then I mean, there's only really a couple of functions that a monarchy has to do, and that is that you have to be a decider of last resort. In other words, should we go to war? Should this law really, this contract of the commons, whatever, should it really ascend? Um, has this political process or this market process gone astray? Um, uh, is this work of art or this cathedral really good for the polity long term? Do I want to signal status and virtue for this on behalf of my realm, or do I not want? It's a pater familia. I mean, as a king is father, and if fathers don't govern, they establish limits. Now we can flip that around and say, but what happens in time? Well, that's what we do in the because father establishes limits in times of plenty and gives orders in times of danger, right? I mean that's what to do. And so the Roman model where they gave you're fascist when you're at war and you're libertarian when you're not. Well, I mean, that's the right way of running the world as far as I can understand. I can't see of any process that's more pro-adaptive than this one. And if you look at history, every other alternative sucks. I mean, basically a monarchy creates a market for polities, and every other solution destroys markets for polities. I mean, the basic problem is how do you organize these monarchies into sufficient power to resist things like the Muslim and the Mongol hordes. It's very hard to do that without having an imperial power. So when you have to resist the hordes, if you're the German 320 whatever it was 60 German princedoms, and you have to resist Napoleon, I mean, you're going to give up your sovereignty in order to be able to do that again. That's what happens. So, I think that age is gone because of nuclear weapons. So my view is that what you really want is a bunch of monarchies with militias and a few nuclear weapons. And I mean, it's politically impossible to coerce that many princedoms or kingdoms to do anything bad, and it's impossible to conquer them. So I think you have the best of both worlds. I mean, in other words, a market for polities, self-defense policies. So that's self-defendable polities is pretty good. I mean, Switzerland with 20 nuclear weapons is about as good as it gets.
River. Is River ready? River, are you there?
Oh, sorry, I'm having I'm working, so it's a little back and forth. Hey, appreciate you doing this AMA. So I wanted to ask you about your Propertarian leanings, but it would take a back and forth. I don't know your work well enough to know what to ask. How deep does that?
My job is to talk to smart guys. So hey, I'm happy to talk to smart guys.
So how deep does does your pauperism go? I'm curious. Like, I mean, do you just constitute epistemology on Popperian grounds? Do you think that he solved the demarcation problem? I mean, like, what exactly is your commitment vis-a-vis Popper here?
Well, I don't think like that, right? A matter of fact, if you were here for the beginning of wordy introduction, I tend to think of the world as in, wow, a lot of people really screwed up to get here. And so that's my view of the world. Is I don't look and say, oh, this person. I said this person had a breadcrumb right, and the rest of the loaf fucked up. And so that's how I tend to look at things. You know, I have this lens I look through, which is the cultural one, especially the lens of the Enlightenment culture's retaliations against it. And when I listen to Popper, I see, what gave birth to George Soros.
So okay, so say I'm trying to I have to unravel it from the sort of a theoretical lens, but you're going from a different perspective. So you would say you don't consider yourself a Paparian? Do you just consider the falsification talk useful?
I consider that he was trying to transfer Darwinian evolutionary theory to science, to the scientific method, and that he was right. And if you want a very technical criticism, I really dislike his nonsense, like the multiple worlds theory. I absolutely just hate that. His article that affected me was Sources of Knowledge and Ignorance, which that article affected me. I think the two things that affected me most were Hayek's speech, Nobel speech, and Popper's Sources of Knowledge and Ignorance. Being hit with those two things within with a short number of days of each other kept me stumbling around for a couple of years from the stun of it. So, I would say that critical rationalism, which was he had the right idea, but he didn't do what I just did, which is break it into dimensions and show that language mirrors reality and how. And so I see myself as completing critical rationalism. If you look at critical preference, he's saying decidability, right? Now this is decidability. Well, the problem was Popper is making a logical statement with critical preference. You can't choose one scientific method or one scientific opportunity for research over another. And this turns out empirically to be false. Now realize Popper didn't do any research. He came up with this purely by thinking about it. But the research says the opposite, is that just as the reason philosophy's been a bunch of bullshit for most of its history is it doesn't account for costs, right? There's no cost in philosophy. It talks about ideals. But in the real world, everything has a cost, like energy, whatever. Shortest time, highest reward, the shortest time, shortest cost, least greatest degree of certainty, least amount of risk. So the world works by cost. It turns out that the best method of scientific investigation is to look for the cheapest thing that provides an insight, and that's because that's hold on. So I'm going down your Popperian thing. So there's a critical rationalism, critical preference, and so in the sense that do I consider myself a Popperian? In the sense that I could feel I could continue the critical rationalist program and turn it into completed it. I think yes.
Then okay, so I think that gets me half of the way where I want to go. Then I guess my question is because especially given the talk about lowest cost for research method, what is truth for you?
Well, it's anything that is consistent and coherent. And in other words, it's got to be both consistent. In other words, it has to survive all 7 dimensions, and it has to be coherent. And I got to be able to. In other words, each of those dimensions has to be expressed in a narrative that is parsimonious and fully accounted. In other words, it's something that survives testing. Now, when that's a truthful statement. In other words, there's a difference between honest, truthful, and true. I can say something honestly because it's at the hypothesis level. I can say something it's true truthful because I've done my due diligence. In other words, I've tested it for consistency and coherence, and I can say it's true if it's tautological. It's a law. I mean, I can't disprove it. It's survived in the market. Now, and then there's true within limits. In other words, and then there's hold on. There's two more levels to go. Then there's perfectly true. In other words, what would truth be if I had all the information in the universe? And there's analytically true, which is not really true at all. It just means it's internal. It's just truthful, internally consistent.
Would this entail? And I'm not sure, so I don't want to pigeonhole you. Would this entail you deny correspondence truth or not?
Well, they're all. I mean, I hate it when people do this because I don't want to say, boy, that's a really dumb question. I just told you something has to be correspondent and consistent within limits.
I heard consistent and coherent. Then I apologize. I misheard.
No, but hold on. Correspondent is a dimension. Coherent is all dimensions.
Okay.
Right. So it has to be correspondent and coherent.
Okay.
So I think that when I say that way, and that you probably understand what I mean now, it has to be both those things. Correspondent. Now I'm going to do it. Let's do it this way. Consistent, correspondent, coherent, and limited. You might as well at this point. We might as well just go to say which dimensions it has to survive.
Okay, then that's good clarity for me. I don't know if that's clarity for anybody else, but thank you. I appreciate that.
No, it's a smart question. It's a great question. I love these things because it's very hard in the text format to have a rapid back and forth so that you can understand each other. And the other thing is that when somebody asks a written question versus you can hear their tone of voice, you get a little more insight this way into where they're coming from. And so I really appreciate it. It's a great question.
One last thing, and I'll leave you alone, and I'll let everybody else. Do you have any opinion on Aristotelianism?
What do you mean, do I have an opinion on it? There's three basic strategies that come out of the ancient world. Reasonableness, the Socratic Socrates. Idealism, Plato.
No.
Descriptivism, Aristotle. And conflationism, Augustine. So, I mean, you get you get quite a few permutations out there. I mean, in the sense that who's most right? Well, who's most decidable is Aristotle. Whether who's most meaningful, in other words, most helpful in you learning, is another second question, and help you in learning that doesn't cause negative externalities is another. So, I tend to look at it as just like I look at virtue, rule, and outcome ethics. If you're a child, you need virtue. I mean, a young person, you need virtue ethics. If you're a specialist you're a professional working with other people, you need rule ethics. And if you're a specialist in a field, you need outcome ethics. And you degrade, this is like degrading resolution in a video. You degrade the resolution of your ethics according to the context of the problem. Well, it's the same thing with truth. I mean, which truth do I need? And with your same question here, what do I need for this particular thing to not be able to cheat? And this is one of the reasons I'm so against rationalism, because I do this graph back in the early 2000s. This graphic shows how easy it is to use things like the test of non-contradiction to create false positives and then claim you made an ethical statement when you made an unethical one.
All right, I'm gonna unmute Swift.
So you had mentioned earlier that while writing your book or writing the book that you'd been working on, it took you about 3 years to solve the religion problem. And my question on that is, what generally is your opinion regarding organized religion, especially, let's put this in the context of Christianity in the Western world?
Well, so what does religion do? Let's take, because we got to say all the way back to our prehistory. It creates a set of theories or assumptions around which a group of people can make similar decisions, but it also defends against folly and deceit. Does that make sense? So a set of common assumptions about the world, or statements or stories about the world, both allows you and I to more likely agree on a path. In other words, make a cooperative decision decidable, but it also prevents wacko over there coming in with another story to try to pull a game on us. So that's number one. So from a pure decidability, that's mythos achieves that particular goal of both very informal pedagogy and defense, legal defense. The legal decidability, the ability to prosecute people who are, or retaliate against people who are trying to deceive. The second thing that you have to do is you have to create trust, right? Trust in people. Now, trust is a hard thing to come by among human beings because we're super predators after all, and it looks like we did a really good job of eating every other super predator on the planet, including the ones that look very much like us. So if we go out there and we say this, we say, well, as populations increase and as the scope of cooperation increases, we need to have better and more rituals, religions, and things like that to help. But we start to encounter a problem at any given scale under this model of it. In other words, as we're getting bigger numbers, we get to the problem we call mindfulness, but it's really what happens to consciousness once you're no longer in a small tribe of people where you know everybody, and you're always trying to figure out what is good or right or true, or what my status and self-worth are. How do I know how to act? Do I feel safe and secure? And so we need to have the functions of feast, ritual, feast to celebrate, ritual to suppress our selfishness, and mindfulness in order to be able to survive emotionally in increasingly poor feedback loops. And we need decidability on top of that so that we can coordinate our actions. Now, these problems stay consistent no matter how big the scale, and they become extremely dangerous in a place like America today, where we have such high desocialization that 40% of our women are on antidepressants, and we're starting to have a vast suicide problem among older men. So we have a really big problem here because of this failure to answer the problem, the services that religion provides. The question is, of all those of the ways those services can be provided, in other words, the way mindfulness, mythical decidability, organizing rules, feasts and feasts of celebration and trust, and feasts of ritual or suppression, trust, sacredness. How those services have to be provided somehow. Well, so if you look at if you say you were to criticize Christianity, we have to, or Abrahamism in general, Christianity. The problem is, if we look at world religions, we probably had the best, quote, religion in history under the Roman Empire. There's probably been nothing better than the Roman pagan cults, where every Tom, Dick, and Harry has his own village person to be sacred with, but then you have the group festivals working together. And then you have Stoicism on top of it. So the Romans considered themselves very pious people, but they also didn't buy any of the Greek bullshit like Greek philosophy. They took Greek law and Greek Stoicism, and they integrated the Greek gods, but they kept it all real. They kept it out of the Greek ideal and brought it into the Roman real. And so most of the good things that happened in Rome and most of the bad things that eventually happened in Greece were a difference between the Greek ideal and the Roman real. Very pragmatic people. They used to make fun of the Greeks the way we make fun of Jews today. I mean, about their verbal artistry. So, so when my view is it doesn't get better than that. The next best thing is what Buddha attempted to do originally, which is to create a personal form of resistance against the world, instead of stoicism, which asks you to do what Jordan Peterson does, which is to build your life around virtues, in other words, by demonstrated actions. Now, the contemplation in Stoicism is less than the contemplation is under meditation, but they both try to achieve the same methods. If we get over into Confucian philosophy and Chinese religion, is they use ritual, and again, the same Roman method in their philosophy, which is reasonableness. I mean, Confucius sort of gets stuck down there with Socrates in reasonableness. I mean, he doesn't quite, he thankfully never makes the mistake Plato does and goes into idealism, but he saves that for Lao Tzu, but he gets that there. But why is it that that a group of people invented lying? Not, I mean, like you and me lie, because but not like the Egyptians told their people, but like out and out institutionalization of lying, which is when Abraham Moses comes down and claims that he's got this freaking tablet from God, and Abraham comes in this, and Jesus claims he's talked to this, and when Peter and Paul do this, right? The early Christians use this mythology as a conflation of the ideal and the real, a conflation of the law and law and wisdom, a conflation of instead of it reverting God's control of the universe and God's are in control of the universe. Why is that all put together and given to us? And why was it distributed through our women enslaved? And then why did they close the Stoics? Why did they do that on purpose? And so my view of Christianity is that everything good in it was there before, and everything bad in it wasn't. And I view the collapse of the ancient world and what we're trying to do over the past 400 years here in the West is we're trying to reverse the Abrahamic Dark Age. Because it is possible to have religions do things that don't lie. We've done it before. And there is things that are possible that don't cause four great civilizations to descend into ignorance and poverty under Islam, or despite being the most literate people in the world for 2,000 years, Jews, to be unable to hold territory and be chased from place to place because, frankly, they deserve it. I mean, we've lost Persia, we've lost the Eastern Mediterranean, we've lost North African civilization, we've lost huge chunks of Southeastern European civilization, we've lost huge chunks of North Indian civilization. So my view of Abrahamism, it's the Abrahamic Dark Age, and that Dark Age was invented, just as Nietzsche said, when Zoroaster comes out and invents this nonsense. Sure, but it's just a story at that point. It's oral tradition. The minute you institutionalize it, write it down in a book and claim it's law, now you're not talking about oral tradition. You're talking about the institutionalization of lying. And so the world has been through a dark age. And my view of religion, yes, religion is necessary. It provides necessary services that human beings cannot live without, especially at scale. But why do we have to institutionalize lying?
Swift.
You had
Oh,
mentioned that you felt that the Roman pagan religions or the cults that they had were. You said that that was a preferable form of religiosity for a society. Uh, and you critique Christianity on the or Abrahamism on the basis of it being institutionalized lying, like Moses claiming that he was given tablets from God or whatever. But couldn't the same thing be applied to these cults, that it's also institutionalized lying? Or is it a difference of these Romans understood that what they were doing it did not transcend the realm of mythos?
It's just that there's a separation. The West, we used not only deflationary truth, which is a very important topic because that's our secret, but we deflated everything. That's what a market is. It's deflated. Everything's broken up into pieces, so it competes. We deflated. We deflated law and religion. What did the Jews do? They conflated them. We deflated religion and philosophy. We deflated science and philosophy. So what we do is we create all these little subcults that compete against each other. And it's the competition between cults that prevents a destructive monopoly. So when people say, so I want to get to the lying thing. So I wanted to hit deflationary competition first because that's the value of it, is markets and everything. But when you say, well, is it lying? Fundamentalism is a reaction. The way we talk about these things is a reaction to the scientific revolution. When we think of fundamentalism today, these are all counter-enlightenment movements. But in most of history, people believe this stuff, but they see a difference between the real and the moral, right? I mean, to them, the religion and moral and law and action, those are deflated. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
and so it's really thick. It's really literature. It's like fairy stories. Now, do we go to these people? Do we go to these people? Hold on, what? Few minutes. It's, how do I say this? It's the more that they considered themselves very spiritual, right? But they had this, but it's the same. I don't know. I'm being rushed here because I'm making too much noise. I would like to actually answer this, but I don't view it as lying. Saying it's literature, and I talk to my gods. I mean, I'm a pretty religious person in that sense that I talk to God every day. But I know the difference between God in role play, conversation, self-worthing, and God in helping me understand, and the difference between and what I would view as my God, which might just be my subconscious, I don't know, and the difference between that and what's real. I would never use religion in argument.
Okay. And you had brought up fundamentalism, and I don't know if you need to go soon. If you do, that's fine. But you had mentioned fundamentalism, and I do generally agree. I do think that fundamentalism is bad, and you'd also brought up the idea of having a monopoly over these. Basically, when you have this sort of institutionalized lying where it does have this monopoly, it is something which is generally negative. But I don't know if necessarily this is a form of lying, because if you look at early Christian traditions, like people specifically like Origen, a lot of these Christians didn't interpret the Bible as this authoritative, like it is what is written in the Bible is what actually happened in reality. The quote from Origen is almost nearly that we do not believe that, the Garden of Eden and so forth, or what happened in Genesis happened in actuality, but rather in appearance.
That's what Augustine says, right?
Yeah.
That's what Augustine says. This is, don't you guys have taken this too far. This is all this means. If there's ever a conflict, then you must assume that this is just literature. That's not that's not how it's used, though, right?
Yeah, I suppose that is true. It is often, I suppose, to those people who do not who don't have the capacity to understand this, or I wouldn't say the capacity, but just don't bother to understand it, like the majority of people. I suppose that it is for them in many ways an institutional lie, which I think that is a valid point to
the
make.
minute you're using, it's a lie. In other words, if you're using it in persuasion and argument, it's a lie. Right? I mean, that's the test. I mean, there's litmus tests for everything. You can find one. Litmus test is that if you're going to say, well, so and so said, or then it's false. If you're saying, I just wouldn't want to do that, because all other things being equal, I'm going to rely on ancient wisdom because it's survived. Or you say, the only way I know how to get here. But even if you get down to, in the difference between Stoic self-authoring, Buddhist prayer, tea ceremony ritual, or organized dance, or fasting, prayer is the worst fucking answer to everything, because you are, in other words, the way we do that, this chanting stuff, is specifically designed to indoctrinate. It's just awful. And, as someone who's ridden in the back of an ambulance a couple times thinking your life is over with, I understand how we all have needs. I've had cancer twice. I understand what these things are, but there's a difference between that sphere of psychology and the self and the commons and politics and war. And they don't intermingle. That's what deflation means. You keep something in the realm of its applicability. A theory is fine as long as it's within a domain. Literature is profoundly advantageous. Mythic literature is profoundly valuable. Religion is profoundly valuable. I just question whether why can't we do it without lying? I mean, why do we need goofy Babylonian myths? Look at our own history. Whose world history should we be looking at for wisdom? I mean, is there any world history we should look at for more wisdom than our own? Who dragged humanity out of ignorance, poverty, tyranny, disease, starvation? Who did superstition? Who did that? Well, that was us. And Abraham was invented to stop us.
Swift, you want to jump in?
It was invented to stop us.
It
was imposed on our people on purpose by Constantine, who was highly sympathetic to the superstitious underclasses, as a way of empowering them and disempowering the nobility, because the nobility ran the religious system.
Okay. Swift has a question for you, and we'll let him ask that.
All right. You kind of been speaking about this a little bit just in your last answer. The alt-right, which kind of overshadows neo-reactionary now, can be described as a traditionalist movement. Most of its leaders are followers of Julius Evola or C.S. Lewis. Like in Arthurian legend, there is a feeling among many young men that they're seeking the Holy Grail to revive King Arthur and therefore the land. What are your thoughts on traditionalism, and do you believe it and the alt-right have merit in the modern age?
Well, I wrote that all philosophies are class philosophies, and all people use the method of argument they understand, and that all people seek a source of power and inspiration in argument that they understand and is available to them. So, it's going to be logical for me as an Anglo, from the upper classes to think like I do, and it's going to be logical for a working class guy to go, or a lower class guy to go for National Socialism. It's going to be normal for a middle class guy to go to the traditional. I mean, this is just normal, looking for what works. I mean, the problem is you can't roll back the clock on knowledge. You can't. So if you want to bring back the social order that was successful in the past, which is the tripartitism, then I agree. The problem is you're not going to do it with superstition and fantasy stories. I mean, that's good for a bunch of silly young men, but grown-ups don't operate that way. Grown-ups operate with stuff you can calculate, stuff you can plan, stuff you can develop logistics with, rules you can set in place and administer. I mean, I just view it as a sentimental populist approach to under democracy, when I don't think the answer is democracy. I think the answer is violence.
I felt like you quoted Sorel right there for a moment.
What?
Yeah, Sorel, like violence is the only way to smash the system.
I was influenced by Sorel.
So do you believe the alt-right is opposed to using violence?
No, I just think you probably haven't been following me long enough, but I said people need a moral justification for action. They need something to demand, a change in state. They need a plan of action to transition, and they need a means of altering the status quo. Those leaders and tactics to alter the status quo in order to implement change. And no society economy has been ever as fragile as we are in right now, and is so perfectly timed to create a revolution. So I think it's a wonderful time for it. Now, my theory is that if a revolution becomes a credible threat, that it will be unnecessary. But the only way to make a revolution unnecessary is to make it a credible, if not deterministic, threat. And I think this year I'm going to work on. I have to have something to hang my hat on in order to start going after what I call the well-intentioned but silly people. But I think this year I'll probably try to have some effect on the alt-right, if not just the right, by going after people who have silly ideas. Because really, inspiration is just ideology. Either you really want to make a change, or you're just a LARPer.
That's good.
Okay, and we have another question from Dark Sun. If he's there to ask that, I'll let him do that.
All right, this is Mart's Curt. Hi, good that you're doing this.
Sure.
So I was going to ask, we kind of have this understanding now that the right has given up hope, that it's now the hopeless right, I guess.
Yes.
And it's kind of well understood. But what do you think is the next psychological condition, or do you think this is the end state that we kind of are going to be living with for now?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, so we've given up hope in terms of educating the left, or kind of the degenerates, or the people who are not going to be joining the aristocracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is this just like the baseline now that we're going to be operating from, or is there some other baseline of like, okay, this is what we're trying to do now, and this is the
only way to defend yourself is to rule,
right,
and to rule justly.
right? And so to do away with all kinds of lies and superstitions, right?
Yep.
All right.
Can you say that quote one more time? The only way to live is to rule.
And then we also have a question from the Zach, but I don't believe he's here right now. And that question is, how do I know you're not lying?
You have to falsify what I say, man. I take the approach that I stand up on the fucking hill, play king of the hill, and come take me down. I don't claim I'm right. I just claim I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
As far as I know.
Appreciate that question.
That's really good.
Real quick, is my mic working?
All right. Well, it seems to me that the questions are slowing down. And you yourself had mentioned that you were in trouble for being a little bit too loud. So,
Yes, well, see,
if you'd like to wrap this
people
up,
will give me crap for this, but I consider Ukraine my home, and I have someone over there I care about very much. And so I when I came back to the States to get these things done, I stayed with family rather than open. In other words, didn't set up a whole apartment and furnish it and whatever. And so I have to be respectful of the people who work for a living.
yeah. So what I was thinking we could do is, since the AMA questions are kind of dying down, we could do a post AMA, and we could open up the mic so that we can have a more open conversation. If you're up for that, that's
Sure.
fine.
I